We are on page Yud Tes Amud Aleph, 19a. And we learned yesterday about the three cases where the Mishnah tells us when a person deserves to be put in nidui, which is to be ostracized and excommunicated. We also learned about the laws of being excommunicated yesterday, and the 24 cases that the Rambam brings about different people who are ostracized. And we learned that the Gemara here mentions that there's 24 from the Mishnah, and the Gemara asked, what about this case? Why didn't Rabbi Elazar found 3, and the Gemara asked, what about this case, and what about that case? And so he asked about a case of from a man of the Toidos from Rome, that Toidos had encouraged the people of Rome to bring the Paschal to eat a dinner, the Pesach night dinner, similar to the Korban Pesach, like symbolic of the Korban Pesach. They should have a entire gedi, a goat should be slaughtered and roasted the same way the Korban Pesach was roasted. It's called the gedi mekulas. What's the exact word? Gedi.
Tied up.
Gediyim mekulasim, and that's the plural. On the night of Pesach, he wanted to have a reminder of the Korban Pesach. So there was like an entire gedi with the legs, the knees tied on the side and around it. And it was the term mekulas means mezuyan, like armed. It looked like the gedi was armed. It looked like it had its sword on its side, and similar to the way the real Korban Pesach was. And it had its innards next to it, around it, and it was tied together, and they would put it on a spit, and it would be roasted. So they wanted to put him in chayrim, and the only reason they didn't was because he was a special, special dignitary. They didn't put him in chayrim, but they wanted to. So you see over there's a reason to put someone who goes against the rabbis, because this was a law that you're not allowed to have. You're not allowed to have for the night of Pesach. You're not allowed to have something similar to the Korban Pesach, because people are going to think the wrong thing. They're going to think that you're allowed to have this type of meat on the night of Pesach. And the Gemara said that this is only a brisa. And because it's a brisa, it wasn't part of this calculation of 3. Only 3 cases we found, and not this case. And the final case the Gemara asked was, what about the case of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, the case of Tanur Shel Achnai, and this was the type of oven that they had broken in order to become tahor. And the question is, does it come back to potential tumah? Is it susceptible to tumah if it's made back into an oven? And the case was, it was somewhat plastered back with sand. They plastered it back, and the question was, does that constitute a vessel? Rabbi Eliezer says it's completely pure. It doesn't come back to its state of being called an earthenware vessel, but the Chachamim say it does. And the problem was, what happens if they use some of the items for the Beis Hamikdash, for holies, things that are connected to holiness? Is it if it became tamei? And what do they do in such a situation? It'll be an argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. And what happened there? The final conclusion there was that they placed Rabbi Eliezer in Cherem. So I want to read for you the Gemara there so that you will know what we're talking about. A very interesting Gemara. And so if you learn the case of Tanur Shalachna, you really need to know the Gemara of Tanur Shalachna. It's a Gemara in Baba Metzia. So I'm going to read it for you. It's a very interesting story, and it does say a lot about the greatness of these rabbis, and at the same time, at how important it is to respect the opinion of the rabbis. So the Gemara is on page 59 in Baba Metzia. And it says that if one cut an earthenware oven into segments and placed sand between each and every segment, Rabbi Eliezer deems it ritually pure. Because of the sand, it's not susceptible to ritual impurity. The rabbis deem it ritually impure, and it is as it is a functionally a complete oven. It's usable, and this is the Tanur of Achnai. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of the word Achnai? Why is it called that? So Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said it is. You know what? Let me share screen so that you can follow. I guess let's do that. Let's share screen here. Okay, so here we are on Sefaria. Let me see what's going on here. Okay. And the Gemara here says, so what is the relevance of Achnai, a snake in this context? So Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said, it is called this because it's the rabbis surrounded it with their statements like this snake, which often forms a coil when at rest, and deemed it impure, which means that the rabbis, they asked enough questions to Rabbi Eliezer that sort of like put him in the corner. They locked him in with all their questions on him. The sages taught on that day when they discussed this matter, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinions, but the rabbis did not accept his explanation from him. So after failing to convince the rabbis logically, Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. And the carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits, and some say 400 cubits. The rabbi said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a carob tree. So Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it.
What's happening?
The stream will prove it. And the water in the stream turned backwards and began flowing in the opposite direction.
Oh my God.
So the rabbis told Rabbi Eliezer, they said to him, one does not cite halachic proof from a stream. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. And the walls of the study hall leaned inward, began to fall. Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if the Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halacha, Jewish law, what is the nature of your involvement in this dispute? So the Gemara relates that the walls did not fall because in deference to Rabbi Yehoshua, but they did not straighten in deference to Rabbi Eliezer, and they remained leaning. And they still remain leaning. So Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halach is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. And a divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you deferring with Rabbi Eliezer? The halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place. Rabbi Yoshua stood on his feet and said, it is not in heaven. The Torah is not in heaven. The Gemara asks, what is the relevance of this phrase, it is not in heaven? So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, the Torah was already given to Mount Sinai, at Mount Sinai. We do not regard a divine voice, a baskoil, a heavenly voice. We don't consider it significant, as you already wrote it, Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority to incline. We go after the majority. Since the majority of rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, so the heavens cannot call out a baskoil, a heavenly voice, and say who the halacha is like. It goes by the majority. And the halacha is not ruled in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. And it doesn't, a heavenly voice won't help that. The Gemara relates years afterwards, Rabbi Nassan encountered Elijah the prophet and said to him, what did the Holy One, blessed be he, do at that time when Rabbi Yoshua issued his declaration? What was going on in heaven? What was Hashem doing? So Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Nitzchuni bonai, nitzchuni bonai. So that's the story of this oven, that it created a tremendous heavenly, it created, the things were changing, the world, making changes in the world, the stream, the carob tree, the walls of the Beis Medrash, the heavenly voice. And yet the rabbis said none of this means anything. It all goes by the opinion of the majority of rabbis that are here on earth. That's the final conclusion. And the Gemara continues, and it says that the sages said on that day, the sages brought all the ritually pure items that were considered pure by the ruling of Rabbi Eliezer with regard to the oven and burned them in fire. And they reached a consensus in his regard, meaning they decided what should they do to him. Number one is they had to remove all of the things that he claimed were pure, because according to the rabbis, they were impure. And so they had to burn a lot of these items, a lot of these pure things, but they had to burn them because they were really impure. And the rabbi said, what should we do with this Rabbi Eliezer? He's not giving in to the majority opinion. So they decided, and so they reached a consensus in his regard, and they ostracized him. And they said, who's going to go and inform him of his ostracism? Rabbi Akiva, his beloved disciple. Rabbi Akiva said to them, I will go, lest an unseemly person go and inform him in a callous and an offensive manner, and he would thereby destroy the entire world. Now, what did Rabbi Akiva do? He wore black and wrapped himself in black, expressing mourning and pain, and he sat before Rabbi Eliezer at a distance of 4 cubits. Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Akiva, what is today from other days? Why are you acting differently, wearing these different clothing, sitting far away? Rabbi Akiva said to my teacher, it appears to me that your colleagues are distancing themselves from you, which he employed a euphemism as actually they distanced Rabbi Eliezer from them. Rabbi Eliezer too tore his garments and removed his shoes, which is the law that we read yesterday about a person who's ostracized. He acts like a mourner. And he dropped from his seat and sat upon the ground. The Gemara relates his eyes shed tears. And as a result, the entire world was afflicted. 1/3 of its olives were afflicted, 1/3 of its wheat, and 1/3 of its barley. Some say even dough kneaded in a woman's hand spoiled. The sages taught there was great anger on that day, as any place that Rabbi Eliezer fixed his gaze was burned. And even Rabbi Gamliel, the head of the Sanhedrin at Yavne, the head of the sages, he was responsible for this decision. He was coming on a boat at the time, and a large wave swelled over him and threatened to drown him. Rabbi Gamliel said, "It seems to me that this is only for the sake of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, as God punishes those who mistreat others or mistreat great rabbis." And Rabbi Gamliel stood on his feet and he said, "Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that neither was it for my honor that I acted when ostracizing him, nor was it for the honor of the house of my father," which means Rabbi Gamliel came from the very special lineage of the Nesiim, the leaders, Hillel. And he said, "I didn't do this for my honor or for my father's or the house of my father that I acted. Rather, it was for your honor, so that disputes will not proliferate in Israel." In response, the sea calmed from its raging. And then comes the next little story. Rabbi Gamliel, the Gemara further relates that Ima Shalom, who was the wife of Rabbi Eliezer, her name was Ima Shalom, and she was the sister of Rabbi Gamliel. So Rabbi Eliezer was related to Rabbi Gamliel. He was a brother-in-law. So his wife, Rabbi Eliezer's wife, from this incident and forward, she would not allow Rabbi Eliezer to lower his head and recite the Tachnun prayer, which includes the begging Hashem. She feared that were her husband to bemoan his fate and pray at that moment, her brother would be punished. I think the commentaries mention that this doesn't mean he didn't say the Tachnun. She would interrupt him from the saying the Tachnun immediately after the Shemona Esrei. And because they were interrupted, it didn't have the full effect.
Rabbi.
In other words, it's very important to say Tachnun without interruption from the Shemona Esrei. So she used to interrupt him on purpose. After every Shemona Esrei that he said, she would interrupt him. And this way, because she feared that if he had full concentration, if he didn't interrupt the Tachnun, it would end up that her brother would die or would be punished. So a certain day around the Rosh Chodesh, and she substituted a full month for a deficient month, which means that she made a mistake and she thought that there was only a 1 day Rosh Chodesh. Really, it was 2 days Rosh. I'm sorry. She thought it was a 2 day Rosh Chodesh, and it was really a 1 day Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, she didn't have to interrupt him, she thought, because it's Rosh Chodesh, we don't say Tachanun. And so she wasn't there. And therefore, he ended up saying Tachanun. Or another explanation is there was a pauper who came to the door and she took bread out to give him. And in the meantime, her husband said the Tachanun without interruption. When she returned, she found him that he was saying Tachanun, that he had lowered his head. And she said to him, "Arise, you already killed my brother." And meanwhile, the sound of the shofar emerged from the house of Rabbi Gamliel to announce that the Nasi had died. Rabbi Eliezer said to her, "From where did you know?" She said to him, "This is the tradition that I received from the house of my father, the father of my father. All the gates of heaven are apt to be locked except for the gates of verbal mistreatment. In other words, that because Rabbi Gamliel, so to speak, mistreated Rabbi Eliezer, therefore he died. When Rabbi Eliezer said Tachnun, it caused him to die, and that's basically the end of this Gemara. Well, there's a few small paragraphs afterwards. The sages taught one who verbally mistreats a convert violates 3 prohibitions. One who oppresses him violates 2, and basically talks about oppressing someone. Okay, so that's the end of this story.
Rabbi,
let's stop the share. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes.
In Sefaria, if you highlight the words that you want, okay, and then go over to the commentary, if you click on the commentary, I think you automatically get the commentaries related to that particular paragraph.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yep. Okay. So that's the story of the Tanur Shel Achnai, and our Gemara was asking that you see over there that he was placed in Nidui. Yeah, and according to that, we see a case of Nidui in the Mishnah. Because this is a Mishnah where it talks about that they sliced this oven into parts, and the rabbis said it's tameh, or it'll become tameh if it's touched by something tameh. And Rabbi Eliezer said, no, it stays pure.
Rabbi.
So the Gemara is asking, in the middle of asking this question, why is that not counted? So the Gemara answers, I just want to say the answer, and then I'll come to your question. What is the Gemara answer? So we're now about 20 lines up from the bottom of the page. Actually, I should read part of the question again, because the question, I don't know if we went through it or the entire question. So the question was, my achnai, what is achnai? Why is it called achnai, like a snake? It teaches us that they surrounded Rabbi Eliezer with laws that try to prove him wrong, like a snake surrounds a person and keeps him stuck inside. V'tim'uhu, and the rabbis said it's tameh. V'tanya, and we learned in a brisa, that day they brought all the pure items that Rabbi Eliezer said were pure, and they said are not pure really, because this oven is really impure. V'sarfum lefanav, and they burnt these items before Rabbi Eliezer. V'lebsaif barchuhu, in the end, they had to put him in cherem. So you see, the Gemara is asking here, and it doesn't have the question mark because the Gemara doesn't have the marks, but that's where the question mark belongs. The question mark is the question is, so you see that there's a Mishnah where we see that Rabbi Eliezer was placed in cherem for not accepting the majority view. Afilo hachi nidui b'masnisin leitanan. The Gemara answers, nevertheless, it doesn't say in the Mishnah that he was put in nidui, that he was excommunicated. It only says in the brisa afterwards, it says about his excommunication. Therefore, Rabbi Elazar did not use this as an example, as a case in the Mishnah where you find nidui, you find someone being placed in nidui. And this was the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's statement that there's 24 cases of being where we put someone in nidui because they didn't honor, they didn't give proper respect to the Rav, to the rabbi, to the chief rabbi, and here, or to the Bezdin, to the decrees of the rabbis. And here we find this case. The Gemara says, no, this is a case. This is not in the Mishnah. This is in a brisa. The Mishnah talks about the case. The brisa tells you about he was put in nidui. And because of that, it's not really in the Mishnah. The nidui part, the fact that he was ostracized is not in the Mishnah. So Ella b'chaf daled mekaymes heicha meshkachas la. How is it possible that there's 24 places if Rabbi Eliezer only found 3 in the Mishnah? And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said there's 24. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi medabem milsa lemilsa. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was comparing many things to other things. Wherever it was fit to be nidui, he compared those cases. He connected the idea of being put in nidui to all the cases that should have had nidui, should have had ostracism. Rabbi Elazar did not compare matters. He was looking for cases that spelled out clearly they ostracized someone, and he only found 3, and that's why Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says 24, and Rabbi Elazar said there are 3. So that really concludes our Gemara. I think David had a question first. Is that right, David?
Yeah. I just wanted to make an observation about the story from the other Gemara. Hashem was willing to allow the laws of nature to change, like the stream to run up backwards and the carrot tree, but Hashem was not willing to mess around with anybody's free choice. He didn't want to do anything to change the free choice of the Chachamim, that they should change their mind. If they decided from what they saw they were going to change, but he wasn't going to directly affect their free choice. Hashem was more willing to allow the laws of nature to change, it seems, than affect the free choice of the Chachamim.
Right. Correct. Interesting observation.
Right.
Let's see. We have Ezra. Yes, Ezra.
I have a question. It says, "Ulbasof ba'chuhu afilu hachinidui b'matnitin." So, "ba'chu" over here, is that a euphemism? That's because.
Yeah, I'm not sure the source of that word. Let me take a look. 1 second.
I saw that they said it's a clean way of saying it.
Oh, is that who says that? Where did you see that? It sounds that way. I was just wondering what the source is.
I see it.
Does it bring a source? Where do you see that? Who writes
in my book?
Which one do you have?
Let me see. I have the Steinsaltz, so it must be Saltz.
Okay, so that's it. Yeah, that must be it. Yeah, so you're right, Ezra. That's the Steinsaltz brings that it's a nice way of saying it. It's a euphemism.
Could I ask
my
a
question? Was where did you find the other Gemara that you were reading from?
Baba Metzia 59.
I don't have it.
Baba Metzia 59.
Baba Metzia, okay. Okay, I don't have that.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, so that's what it seems like. It must be a euphemism. Thank you, Ezra and Ben, for bringing that up. Okay, yes, Susan.
Was this Hashem's way of testing to see if the majority rule was strong enough?
That's so interesting that you mentioned that. There is a commentary that mentions that Hashem was testing the rabbis to see if they were going to follow the majority or not, and it was like a test. And so that's so interesting that you
the fact that Hashem allowed
this is actually in the Rabbeinu
ostracized. It was almost like I don't know that the rabbis suffered to be ostracized. I mean, he must, and then his brother died. I mean, his wife's brother died, and the family suffered, and I find that very sad.
You find very sad that what?
That that Hashem made that he needed to test the rabbi. I don't know why he needed to test the this whole situation. There must have been something that the something, there had to be some major reason that this whole thing happened. It couldn't have been just whether something was holy or not. There must have been some discord among all the rabbis, not just this one thing. Maybe they were all getting so on each other's case about arguing that Hashem decided, okay, somehow I must stop this. I can only imagine that maybe that was the case.
In any event, I think what you mentioned earlier is very interesting that you came up with that, because it's actually mentioned on the side of the Gemara. If anyone wants to look at it, it's on the side of the Gemara on the next page. Rab Nisim Gaon, in the side, there's a like smack in the middle, maybe about I would say about 25 lines from the top. It says, there's a big question here that Rabbi Nissim Goyen asks, and it's also asked in the Tosfos and in the other Gemara. It's asked in Eruvin. Basically, there's a big question, because there's a place where it says that a bas koil called out, a heavenly voice called out and said that the halacha follows Beis Hillel. And guess what? We go according to that bas koil. When the bas koil, the heavenly voice, said we follow Beis Hillel, the Gemara says that's the final halacha. We follow Beis Hillel. And so why in this Gemara about Achnai do we not follow the Rabbi Eliezer? So everyone, all the commentaries try to find some answer for this question. So this Rabbeinu Nissim gives two answers, and his second answer is, I'll tell you, his first answer is that this bas koil just said that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer in general in all places, but not every specific place. So therefore, we don't follow this bas koil because it didn't exactly specify here the halacha is like him. It said in all places the halacha is like him, but not specifically in this specific case. It's more of a general statement. That's the first answer of Rabbi Nissim Goyen. And the second answer, he says, is that this was not a real bas koil. It was a sort of like a test for the rabbis just to see if they were going to follow what they thought might have been a bas koil. And he says that it was only to test them and to see if they would drop what they thought, just because of a bas koil, or if not. And it's similar to the verse that Hashem tests. He tests you to see if you really follow his ways. And this is what Rabbi Shua answered. I need to
ask something else.
Just 1 second. This is what Rabbi Shua answered, that it's not in heaven, meaning the Torah of Hashem is complete, and it was given in Sinai, and he taught us that we can't switch anything. In our Torah, there's nothing missing, and we don't need any proofs from heaven. And every place in the Talmud that it says, Rabbi Yeshua says, Ein mashkichin bebas koil, this is the source of it. And he also says what he mentions here, what Ezra just mentioned, he says that, which is a kinoi, that the word berchuhu is a kinoi. It's a slang, it's a euphemism for nidui, for. And he mentions also that at the end of his life, they were matir, they took off the nidui from Rabbi Eliezer. It says Rabbi Yeshua stood up and he said, Hutar haneder, Hutar haneder. So they exempted Rabbi Eliezer from his ostracism at the end of his life. So that's the story. Okay. Yes, Susan, what was your other question?
What I was going to ask was, are the rabbis today all agreeing? Are they all, I mean, I'm talking about the rabbis that are the ones that rule the decisions that are going on all over the world and in Israel. Are they all agreeing with everything? Or, I mean, is this pandemic a way of Hashem saying, look, you better go back to the source and you better start doing things the right way? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I don't think it's possible for even two rabbis to agree. How much more so when you have hundreds of rabbis? I don't think there's any such option. If Hashem wanted people to agree, he would have had to make us differently. The way God created us in his wisdom was specifically to make us disagree and to give us the ability to see things different ways. So yeah, I totally don't see things that way. Yes, Robert.
I think maybe to better explain to Susan is that not like some churches, there's no rabbinical hierarchy that then makes a ruling that is, again, affects all Jews, because we're structured differently from structured churches, quote unquote. I mean, that's what it comes to, right?
Well, I don't know if I would agree with that. I mean, there are decrees that were established for the entire Jewish people. So
yes, I'm saying that, but I agree. But I'm saying there's no contemporary or one office of the head rabbi of the world where this goes, and then
right in this generation,
exactly.
It seems hard for the rabbis to make a decree, a unanimous agreement on making a decree about something. But if they did, if there was something, then I guess it would carry a tremendous power. If the rabbis all agreed on making some type of a decree, I guess it would have certain, it would have its effect. I mean, there are some great rabbis in Israel, great rabbis here in America, in England and so on. If all the rabbis agreed on a certain decree, I guess it would, would carry a certain weight. In the meantime,
it would be a consensus, but there's no world va'ad that everybody would assemble or have send their emails to. Stuff like that is part of the discussion for me.
Right.
That's what I really was curious about.
I mean, there have been some groups of rabbis like Moetzes Gedolei HaTorah. There's a group of Rabbinical Council of America. There are some that have tried to do so. I think they were hoping maybe to reach such a level of a consensus, being accepted as the chief chief rabbis.
They vote as a block.
Right.
Self-interest, right? So so there's like we say, there's two Jews and three opinions, right? So
it's very hard to get a consensus of the. But in any event, I mean, the fact is, this is a Yeridas Hadoros. This is we're in our generation has reached an altogether low, and this is the way it is before Mashiach comes. We hope that any moment Mashiach will come now, hope this moment, and take us out of this darkness. Okay, so that basically concludes this piece of Gemara, which we were talking about respect for the rabbis and speaking negative about Talmidei Chachamim after they pass away, speaking negative about anyone after they pass away. Gemara talked about, do the dead know? So these were the different Gemaras that we went through, and now the Gemara is going to jump back to the initial discussion about Kriya Shema, and who is exempt when they're involved in a mitzvah of Haitzoas Hameis, taking the dead to be buried, and we're going to jump back now to that discussion which we had in our Mishnah. Yes, Ezra.
Rabbi, so Rabbi Eliezer was removed from Nidui in his lifetime.
Right. I mean, I don't know how much of his lifetime was left. It sounds like he was right before he passed away.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we're now going to begin 15 lines up from the bottom. We're on 19a. 15 lines up from the bottom. Noisei hamita v'chilufeihen. The carriers of the coffin or the bed, the stretcher, v'chilufeihen, and those that substitute for them. So in other words, the Mishnah mentioned, let's jump back, look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that the noisei hamita v'chilufeihen v'chilufei chilufeihen, they're substitutes and the substitutes of the substitutes. We said those that are needed, the ones before that are needed, are exempt from the Kriya Shema and they're exempt from Kriya Shema. And the ones that are not needed, or the ones that are after the Mita, they are chayav in Kriya Shema, but everyone is exempt from Tefillah. So the Gemara now says, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis learned, Ein moitzian es hameis samoch l'Kriya Shema. We do not take out a deceased to be buried near the time of Kriya Shema, because people are going to end up missing out in the Shema. V'im hischilu ein mafsikin. But if they did bring the mace out, they started bringing the mace, the deceased, to be buried, then we do not stop it in order to recite Kriya Shema. And of course, if they finish before the time is over for Shema, of course, then they should say Shema. But we don't stop the Haitza'as HaMeis, the mitzvah they're involved in order to say Shema. Once you started, you don't stop. Now the Gemara asks, Reb Yosef afkuhu samach l'Kriya Shema. But Reb Yosef, they did take him out to be buried near the time when it was to say Kriya Shema. So the Gemara answers, the Gemara says that to answer this question, he was different. He was an Adam Chashuv. Being an Adam Chashuv, being that he was an honorable person, of course, he was a great scholar. And being a great scholar, they did take him out, even though it was the time of Kriya Shema. They can do that. And the reason for that is that because he deserved honor, it wasn't right that they should be involved in something else until they bury him honorably. So what this sounds like is that his honor supersedes Hashem's honor. That's what it sounds like from the Gemara.
Rabbi?
No.
And which is not the first time the Gemara says this. The Gemara there's a Gemara in Makos that tells us that there are some people that stand for a Torah scroll, but they don't stand for the honor of a rabbi. But the Gemara says, but that's very foolish, because the Torah says that a person gets 40 lashes and the rabbis come around and say it's only 39. So in a certain sense, the rabbis override the Torah. Of course, they're interpreting the Torah, they're explaining it, but their explanation is different than the simple reading, which means that they have a certain power beyond the power of the Torah. And so in a certain sense, what it's saying is that the Torah deserves honor, but the rabbis deserve even more honor because they're the ones who interpret the Torah. It means they have a certain koyach over the Torah. And it sort of sounds like a similar thing to this Gemara where initially we would encourage people to say Shema first and then bury the deceased. But here, in order not to, in order to give extra honor to this scholar, we bury them first and don't leave them around, even though it's the time for Kriya Shema. Yes, Ezra.
Now, I was trying to understand ve'imit chilu en mafsikin. I mean, I looked at it as if they did take out the beer of the dead, then you don't stop.
You don't stop what?
You don't stop the procedure,
right.
in order to say the Shema. But that exactly. wouldn't have made sense because the next question is Ini. Are you sure? Unless you want to read it, Ini, is that really true? Then it says so. Then the next line is proof of the fact that the fact is that they did take Rabbi Yosef out close to the time of the Shema, and they did it. And the reason why they did it was because he was different because he was an important individual. Now, the way you read it, vithilu en mafsikin. So if they say the Shema, then they don't stop.
I didn't translate it that way. If they started the Shema, I translated it the other way. If they started taking the casket out, you don't stop to say the Shema. Exactly the way you read it.
Ah, okay. But can you also read it the other way?
No, absolutely not.
They began reading the Shema, they don't stop?
No.
Okay.
Because the whole point is that initially you should begin reading the Shema. So there's no reason to say such a thing. If you began, you shouldn't stop. But initially you were supposed to read the Shema. So the Gemara would not say, if you started, don't stop. Because it says in the first place, you should say Shema first.
Okay.
So yeah, so I don't see any way to read it differently. So this is basically the idea of Oisek b'mitzvah, pater min ha-mitzvah, that if you started to bring out the mace, you are exempt from reciting the Shema. And what we see is that this applies even though you did the wrong thing. You're Isaac in one mitzvah, but you shouldn't have been Isaac in that mitzvah. You should really have said the Shema first. And yet you are still exempt from saying Shema. So that's an interesting, observation of the fact that the law of being involved in a mitzvah and being exempt from another mitzvah applies even if you should not have initially started that mitzvah. Now, what does this exactly mean? So when are you not supposed to start a funeral? So one explanation here is that you shouldn't start samuch l'kriyas shema. Don't start a funeral a half hour before the morning Shema, which would mean the time of Misha Yakir. We know that the initial time to say Shema is the same time when you're supposed to put tefillin on, and talis is Misha Yakir. It's maybe about 20 minutes after maybe about 40 minutes before sunrise. So here, let me be more exact here. Today, sunrise.
Let's see, Miami.
Today in Miami, I should say, right? In Miami, sunrise is 6:41. So the earliest talis and tefillin is 5:57. So a person should, that would be that's called Misha Yakir, when you could see a acquaintance and recognize him. That's if he's standing 6 to 8 feet away from you, and you would recognize him, even though you don't know him very well, but he's an acquaintance that you know a little, and you would read that. That would be at the time of that would be 5:57. So it's about 44 minutes before the sunrise. It's not always. I don't think it's always 44 minutes. Maybe it is, but let's just pick another date here. Let's pick another month.
But
sunrise. One second. Sunrise 6:29, and Misha Yakir is 5:42. So here you have 18 plus 29
47
is 37 minutes.
So it depends on.
So you see, it depends on the day, but it's
Shabbat isn't
18.
But that assumes that you have to make that assumption that there are no lights. So in other words, there are no electrical lights around when you make those decisions. So in other words, I mean,
No, the best way to do it is use a app on your phone. Don't don't unless you're in a campsite where there's no outside lights. You wouldn't be able to calculate. So again, what are we talking about here? The time to say Shema is Misha Yakir. The proper time to begin Shema is Misha Yakir, which is this time today. It would be 5:57. 5:57, and within a half hour before that, you should not start a funeral. And the reason we say within a half hour before that, because the Gemara uses the term samoch, near the time of Shema. It doesn't say at the time of Shema, it says near the time of Shema. And the Gemara in Psachim uses that idea that explains that a half hour before night, we don't, you're not supposed to do anything because you're supposed to be ready to search for the chametz. So the Gemara uses that idea that it goes by a half hour, would be that amount. However, the Rabbeinu Yoina here, he brings a Yerushalmi, from the Jerusalem Talmud that we're referring to here, the amount of time it would take to finish the funeral. So when it says samoch l'kriyas Shema, it means you would not start a funeral unless you could finish it in the amount of time. We're not just talking about the beginning time to start, which the initial explanation that I said was a half hour before Misha Yakir, which would have been a half hour before 5:57. That would be not a good time, not an appropriate time to start, would not be allowed to start a funeral. But we go by when will you finish it? Will you finish it within the amount of time that before the time of Shema begins? And according to that, it's sort of like an estimate. You have to make an estimate how long it will take. Now, there is another question on this Gemara, and that is, what about the night Shema? What is the law? Would this apply to the night Shema? So the initial thought of Rabbeinu Yoina is that the night Shema would be the same, just like the morning Shema. It's just that the Gemara uses at least a simple understanding of the Gemara is that we're talking about the morning Shema, but really it would apply to the night Shema as well. However, Rabbeinu Yoina says that his Rebbe said differently, that at night there's a lot more time to say the Shema than but the morning Shema. The morning Shema, you're limited. Initially, the best time to say it is between Misha Yakir and sunrise. And then you still have 3 hours, but that's it. You only have 3 hours in the day. The night Shema, you have all night until Alois. Or you have until midnight, 6 hours, or till Alois, 12 hours. So you have a lot more time than the morning Shema. And therefore, the Gemara here is, according to the final conclusion of Rabbeinu Yoina, in other words, what he says, based on his teachers, is that this would not be an issue because we are dealing with only the morning Shema, because the night Shema has a lot more time to say it, and we're not concerned. Okay, we're going to continue
Rabbi,
now.
I thought we're not. I thought we don't bury people at night.
No, they do.
Here in Florida, they don't want to pay overtime to the.
But it's allowed to bury somebody at night.
Of course, it's
yes.
I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah. Not here in Florida. You're not going to find much of you won't find it, but it's done in Israel and it's done in actually in New York. There's some cemeteries that will do it at night. So the next Gemara is Shalafnei Hamita v'Shalachar Hamita. We mentioned in the Mishnah that those that are before the Mita, those that are in front, those that are in back, those that are already carried, they didn't carry, the different laws. And the Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis learned, ha'iskim behesped, those that are involved in the eulogy that's done before the burial, bisman shehameis mutal lifnehem, when the deceased is placed in front of them, when they are saying the hesped, nishmatin echad, they can go out one at a time to say the Shema. They should not go out all together, but they go out one at a time. If they went out all together, it would not be respectful. And this is the Kairin, and they say the Shema. Ein hameis butal of them. What happens if the deceased is not there? He's in a different room. So hein yoshvin v'Kairin, they just sit and recite the Shema, and in this situation, they stop the hesped. V'hu yoshev v'daimem, the person who's an avel, the mourner, who's not obligated in mitzvahs, so he just sits and is quiet. And everyone else says the hein yoshvin v'Kairin, and he sits and is quiet. Hein amdim v'maspalim, v'hu aimin amatzik olav asadin. They stand up in daven, and he stands up and does what's called siduk hadin, which is he acknowledges, he admits that Hashem is righteous in his judgment in what he does. V'aymer, and he says, Riboin ha'ilamim, master of the world, harbe chatasi lefanecha, I did many sins before you. V'loy nefrata mimeni echad mini olaf, you have not taken retribution from me, even 1,000th of what I deserve. Yehi ratzain milfanecha, may it be your will before you, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem our God, shetigdar pirtzeisenu, that you should fix our breaches, upirtzeis kalamcha beis Yisrael, and the breaches of all of your nation Israel, berachamim, with mercy. So that is the initial thought of what is said in the Tziduk Hadin, and the Gemara afterwards is going to tell us that Abaye says you shouldn't say such a thing, because what you're telling Hashem is you deserve more punishment than you have. You're awakening that they should argue in heaven that you deserve more punishment. So it's called al tiftach peh, al yiftach peh, al tiftach peh l'satan. Don't open your mouth to Satan, and don't say that you deserve more punishment. So we'll continue with that tomorrow, but that's where we are up to. Okay, if anyone has any questions.